The inclusion of hypothetical situations in biblical, internal, spirituality. What Jesus taught about truly good spirituality goes further than this, and thus we come to the third difference in how the unbeliever defines good and bad spirituality compared to the believer. What Jesus taught about truly good spirituality extends even to what someone would do in different situations. In the Sermon on the Mount, he went beyond the command simply not to murder, and indicated that a man who hates his brother would be subject to judgment. He went beyond the command simply not to commit adultery, and indicated that anyone who looked at a woman lustfully had already committed adultery with her in his heart. Matthew 5:28. What he teaches here is a spirituality in which one becomes morally guilty of a sin if one would commit that sin in other circumstances, whether or not one has yet carried out the sin in the external world in the present circumstances. This is reversal of the typical spirituality and moral assessment of the unbeliever and a skeptic. They tend to judge a person as a spiritually good or bad solely on what acts they performed in the external world in the past, regardless of the internal intentions of their minds and hearts. According to what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount, he judges a person spiritually bad or good, depending on what would happen if the secret intentions of their hearts were carried out in the real world in different circumstances, regardless of whether the person had carried out the act in the external world in the present circumstances. The spirituality that he teaches here is the correct one. If one man was so angry with someone else that he wanted to stab him to death in a dark alley where he would not be seen and thus not get caught, but he does not do so because two police officers happen to be present, God considers rightfully that man to be a murderer, stopped from carrying out his evil intentions by the non-praiseworthy motivation of not being sent to jail or executed. The same is true for many other sins, including adultery. Someone who does not have sex with another man's wife only because he is afraid of his good reputation being lost only needs to be put in a situation in which he is convinced that no one else will ever find out, and he would commit that sin. God considers him already guilty of adultery, and the assessment of any other choice that he makes in other areas is infected by that willingness to commit adultery, such that nothing else he does is spiritually good in the eyes of his Maker, so long as there is some circumstance in which he would commit adultery. I have just covered three aspects of what Jesus taught that make Christianity a system of measuring the spirituality of a man and his moral character that is stricter than any other religion on earth, and far stricter than the typical unbeliever's methods of judging spirituality and the moral character of actions simply by the external act itself. These three factors all deal directly with how one defines what counts as bad or good spirituality, and how one defines what sin is. If I may summarize those three factors, the first is that one cannot define an action or someone's spirituality as good simply on the basis of what he has done externally, but one must also consider what were the internal, secret intentions and motivations of the person doing the act. The second factor is that a willingness to sin or do wrong in one area affects all other areas of that person's spirituality, such that he cannot be spiritually good or do a morally good act, while he does not repent of sin in any other area of his life. The third factor is that the spirituality of a person and the moral character of his actions should be judged by including what he would do in different circumstances. That means that he would be able to lead a seemingly upright moral life on the outside, while he is viewed as wicked and detestable in the eyes of his Maker. When one compares the Christian with the unbeliever in light of these three factors, there is a great difference between the believer and the unbeliever concerning how one defines what is spiritually good and spiritually bad. The unbeliever defines good and bad spirituality by external actions already committed in the external world, regardless of secret intentions of the heart, and regardless of whether he is unrepentant of sin elsewhere in his life. In contrast, in light of what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount, he defined a good and bad spirituality based on the secret intentions of the heart that one has carried out or would carry out in the present situation and in alternative hypothetical situations, with the requirement that in order for an act to be spiritually good, one must reject sin in all other areas of life. These three factors that define Christianity's moral system and its spirituality are crucial to evaluating the believer's confession of weakness and the unbeliever's claims to be strong. When they are applied to the lives of the believer and the unbeliever, the end result would be a reversal of the simple, quick judgment that the believer is weak and the unbeliever is strong. And so, for a third time, we would come to see the Dunning-Kruger effect in the life of the believer compared to the life of the unbeliever. The unbeliever is the weaker of the two persons while thinking himself the stronger, while the believer is the stronger of the two persons while confessing his great weakness.
Thank you for listening. Credible Faith is a global missions-minded apologetics ministry with content available in 7 different languages across 7 websites: German, Russian, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and English. If you would like to support the global apologetics work of Credible Faith, go to crediblefaith.org and click on the donate icon. If you would like me to give an apologetics workshop or participate in a debate at your university, or if you would like me to give a Great Commission missions conference or apologetics conference at your church, get in touch with me through the Contact Us section of the Credible Faith website. You can also submit a request through the website to get Credible Faith's monthly email. If you are a native speaker of Russian, German, Italian, French, Spanish, or Portuguese, and if you notice that an essay from the English website is not available on the Credible Faith website for your language, feel free to get in touch with me about translating the essay, and I would read through your translated material for quality control and the desire to see content from the essay made available in your language. Thank you for listening, and have a great night.